COSATU was against a proposed 2% VAT hike and later criticized the 0.5 percentage point VAT increase for each of the next 2 years. And now that the VAT will remain at 15%, COSATU has reacted to it, and we have Matthew Parks on the line for more on this. And Matthew joining us virtually there. Matthew, good morning. So a midnight announcement and COSATU's immediate reaction to this.
Good morning. Thanks for having us. No, we're quite happy. We had opposed a VAT hike since the beginning because we felt it is an unnecessary burden upon working class and middle class families who are struggling to cope with the cost of living, whose wages often don't keep pace with inflation. And the goods that they buy, whether it's transport or electricity, often increase it far above inflation. So we welcome this. Yes, it is messy. The Minister for Finance will have to table some new proposals for the third time. But we do appreciate that you have a government which shows humility, which is able to eat some humble pie, to listen to COSATU and other political parties and stakeholders, and to say, okay, we hear you, we're going to adjust. We think it's a very simple thing to adjust because they've already reduced VAT from 2% to 0.5%, now to 0% increase. And so the shortfall is not 75 billion rand as the Treasury statement says, because that's already been factored into account. The shortfall is actually the 14 billion rand that the VAT was meant to have brought the additional 0.5%. And because the South African Revenue Service, through the excellent work of its staff, has already managed to overachieve its collection targets by 9 billion rand, then the shortfall you're actually talking about is very, very small. It's 5 billion rand. We think a 5 billion rand adjustment in the allocations to departments and municipalities can really be done over a cup of coffee. It's not difficult. We think we should give SARS the space to continue to improve its tax collection targets before introducing new targets, especially ones which hurt the poor. And of course, there is space to reduce wasteful expenditure, luxury expenditure like traveling, catering, advertisements, consultants, etc. And I also think there is space to have some discussions around, can the developmental finance institutions take some of the burden around some of the economic infrastructure projects? Can the skills authorities take some of the cost of those training programs or public employment programs? So we think there is space. What we don't need to do is to panic. This is a very small adjustment that's needed now. And I think it's a good job by government to listen to society. And I think we're looking forward to further discussions about how can we really ensure that the expenditure we have is correct and how can we ensure that our tax regime is biased towards the poor.
Well, it's taken quite a long time to come to this, Matthew, because the arguments that have been put forward haven't changed. Those who were opposed remained opposed until this moment, and it still went ahead. And when you say the shortfall can now be resolved over a cup of coffee, if it is that simple, why did we get to this point?
Hey, that's I guess the 14 billion rand question, Sakina. Makes no sense. This is completely unnecessary. The 0.5% VAT hike was going to only amount to 0.5% of the entire budget. It did not make sense to go to the political war for that. We understand the logic of Treasury wanting to hedge the bets, especially in very uncertain economic climates with the tariff hikes, with the possible ending of AGOA by the United States. That it's quite difficult to predict economic turbulence ahead of us. But still, we thought there were much simpler, much easier, less offensive ways to address this issue, especially through the South African Revenue Service. We have a tax compliance rate of 64%. So that means 36% of taxes owed to the state are not being collected. And SARS has shown that it's got the capacity to improve tax compliance, but it needs the support with regards to resources, to hire staff, to invest in IT capacity and infrastructure, and to go after the big earners. And of course, those employers and those businesses who choose to ignore the tax regime. So I think for us, those are the kind of critical things we need to focus on. It's unfortunate, it's messy, it's not elegant that we had this 2-month political theatrics. But nonetheless, I think for us, we want to focus on the big high-level issues that government has listened to our objections. There is no VAT hike. And I think for us, the most critical thing right now is to ensure that government doesn't respond emotionally, that it's a very surgical, small incision to say to SARS, generate this additional 5 billion rand shortfall. Let's maybe tweak some luxury expenditure here and here. Let's see how we can mobilize greater investments for infrastructure, for public employment. But what we don't need to do is to abandon some of the very progressive allocations in the budget, like additional nurses and doctors, the wage agreement for teachers and so forth, the 4,000 police officers that will be hired. We need to retain those progressive things. including the measures to protect the poor, like expanding the basket of VAT-exempt food items, increasing social grants by double inflation. Those are good things which are still relevant. We just need a very surgical approach around this 5 billion rand shortfall.
And of course, you say 5 billion, Treasury says 75 billion. I suppose we need to understand from their perspective how they've arrived at the amount that they state, Matthew, as opposed to the one that you state.
Well, our stats come from the budget. So the 75 billion rand, well, we don't know where they get that one from. The 2% VAT hike, according to the budget, the original 2% was going to generate 58 billion rand. Even if they added the PIT non-adjustment for tax brackets, that is only going to take it to about 74 billion rand. So that's perhaps where they got it from. But the statement talks about the VAT hike. We hope it does include the PIT adjustment for inflation too. That'll be an additional progressive measure. But already the VAT hike was reduced from 2% to 0.5% over the past month, and the budget was adjusted accordingly already. So when the Finance Committee met last month and said no VAT hike, adjust PIT for inflation, that combined was about 31 billion rand together, not 75 billion rand. And if you take into account that SARS has already over-collected 9 billion rand, then you're talking about 22 billion rand shortfall. And we think there is some space to some minor adjustments here and there between SARS improving collection further, between sharing some of the burdens for the economic infrastructure and training programs, reducing some wasteful expenditure here and here. There is ways you can do it without having to abandon progressive budget allocations. We don't think it's too difficult. Perhaps you may need 2 cups of coffee to resolve it.
We'll leave it there for now. Thanks so much. COSATU's Matthew Parks there reacting to the latest regarding the VAT increase.